This girl got pregnant for her father, and you won't believe what happened next. This is a true life story of 17-year-old BC who lived with her father Wale, a 49-year-old fashion designer in a popular neighborhood in Lagos. Just like every other teenage girl of her age, BC had great dreams of becoming prominent in the future, but her case suddenly turned out to be a case of what she wanted versus what the society gave her. BC's tale of woe started after her mother abandoned her barely when she was 2 years old for her paternal grandmother. Her mother, who was then a junior secondary student, was impregnated by Wale, who was 32 years old at the time. Initially, Wale had reportedly denied paternity of the pregnancy but later opted for an abortion on the grounds that he could not afford to father a child then because he was only an apprentice. But his mother came to the rescue as she offered to take care of the baby, who turned out to be BC. When BC was 12 years old, her father reportedly took her from her grandmother with the promise of sending her to a better school. It turned out that rather than live up to his promise, Mr. Wale allegedly started assaulting her sexually, a practice that went on until he was eventually arrested by men of the Nigerian police force. Narrating how it all started, BC, in her sitting position with her head buried between her legs with tears running down her eyes and a shaky voice, narrated her story. "When I was leaving my grandmother's house, I was happy because my father said I would be attending a better school, but I waited for months upon months without being enrolled in any school. One night then, I was 12, my father called me into his room and told me he took an oath with my mother to be the first man to have sex with me. He said it had a spiritual connotation that it was to enable him assume his proper financial state. I was too young to understand what he meant. He then went ahead to undress me and had carnal knowledge of me that night. At a point, he asked if it was painful. All I did was to watch him have his way, still unable to understand what he was doing. I just lay there until he was done. From that day, it became a routine. It continued until I was 14 years old. One fateful day, I took ill. I started having funny feelings and I told him I was sick, and he took me to a nearby hospital. When we conducted the pregnancy test, it came out positive. The next day, he took me to somewhere in the home of a herbalist in the Ikorodu area of Lagos, who gave me some concoction. I drank some in his apartment and took the rest home. After 2 days, my menstruation started and my father assured me all was well. He then allowed me for a week's break before he continued his sexcapade with me. I was devastated. 2 years later, when I was 16, I got sick again. When I informed my dad, we went for another pregnancy test, which confirmed my fear. I was pregnant again. When he returned the next day from his shop, he told me there was no need to go to the herbalist. Rather, he gave me 2 sachets of alabakun and squeezed some lime juice into a cup, asking me to take it in a gulp. It did the magic and my menstrual flow started few days after. After the second abortion, I became tired of the whole thing. I started being afraid every night. At times, I would put tissue paper under my panties, pretending I was witnessing my monthly flow. After a while, he got the trick and started taking note of my dates. One fateful day, I summoned courage and reported the sacrilegious act to our neighbors, but none of them could confront him. Rather, they told me they could not interfere in our family affair. With her head still bent, but this time, tears gushing down her cheeks, she then continued. I was further depressed and discouraged by the cold reaction from our neighbors. I decided to stand up for myself for the first time in my life, looking straight into my father's eyes for the very first time since the sacrilegious act started. I told my father I was tired of the whole thing. To make my threat real, I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a kitchen knife, and threatened to stab him if he attempted to force himself on me again. This time, I was serious. On that fateful evening, my father had just returned home from his shop as usual, and at about 6 p.m., he called me inside to warm his bed. But when he saw the knife, he retraced his steps. I quickly ran inside my room with the knife in my hand and packed my things out of the house to stay with a friend whose family welcomed me after I had narrated all that I have been going through over the years. After spending about 3 weeks with them, I received a text message from my father asking me to come home or I would die. When I showed the text message to the family I was putting up with, they suggested I reported the case to the police. At first, I was scared because he would eventually be jailed if I reported him, but I changed my mind when the text message threat continued coming in. He was eventually arrested but showed no signs of remorse. According to Mr. Wale, BC's father, what he did was not a new thing. Even if he is jailed at the end, He will surely come out after serving his jail term, dismissing the issue with a wave of the hand. According to him, he went back to claim his child so as to fulfill the oath between him and the child's mother. That was why he took her to the herbalist when she became pregnant, so as to appease the gods of her mother's land. It turned out that when her mother was 6 months pregnant for her, he made love to her. She later told him that it was a taboo for a man to sleep with a pregnant woman in her place. According to him, BC's mother told him that the only remedy was for the man to be the first person to sleep with the unborn child. Initially, he didn't want to do it, but he discovered that things were not going well for him financially. And when he made inquiries, he was made to understand that he had to appease the gods of BC's mother's land so as to attain his rightful place in destiny. One would ask why he continued after the first time and why he did not satisfy his sexual urge on his wife, who has had 4 children for him. He explained that they lived apart because he didn't want his wife and other children to suffer the consequences of his actions and did not want his wife to also know he was sleeping with his own daughter. Sitting at a corner in the Human Rights Office, 17-year-old BC could not raise her head to face anyone. She simply stated that at last, she had been freed from the psychological trauma associated with her father's sacrilegious act. Unfortunately, this is 1 in 1,000 cases that would actually be heard. Recently, a friend of mine confessed to me that her dad sleeps with her on the 1st of every month. She finds herself at home and they always have good sex. I thought she was pulling my legs, but when she said the man deflowered her at the age of 4, I shivered. The mom does not know, and I'm guessing her dad does it for rituals. Last week, I met her very close to my office and I asked her how far. She started crying and told me that she had aborted 5 times for her dad. She could not find any man to love her again because of guilt. Her mom is dead now and she is the only child. These are similar stories that have been told of men defiling their daughters. There were also recent reports of a father who raped and impregnated his daughter and expelled her from their home. A 5-year-old stepdaughter who was brutally raped. A woman whose son fathered her 3 children. This bizarre story poured in daily, eluding law enforcement personnel who are not equipped to prosecute or are frustrated by the slow process of the nation's court. Most of these cases, even when reported, are settled out of court, which may account for the paucity of data on cases of incest across the country. Yet, there are scientific reasons why incest is prohibited. It is to avoid inbreeding, a collection of genetic disorders suffered by the children of parents with a close genetic relationship. Sadly, victims of incest may never get justice, as the justice system itself is not fair. Guys, do well to drop your honest comments in this comment section. Tell us what you think. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video. Thank you.